We'll just wait another minute as more people are rolling in here before we kick things off.
Yeah, looking
Got
forward to it.
got Jackie in here a couple times.
Hey, Jackie.
Got Peter and got a couple note takers. We've got Josh, Mr. Josh. How you doing today, brother?
All good here.
Good,
Hey,
good.
Josh.
Got Nicole's note taker. We got a Firefly, Firefly Jeff.
Well,
All these
uh,
note takers.
I
ha- uh,
know.
ha- happy birthday, by the way, Dan. Was that yesterday, right?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, happy birthday,
Yep.
Dan.
32 again.
Well, I was gonna say 29. Getting
There you
old.
go. There you
Yeah.
go.
Do you have
Yeah, no
anything
fit.
big planned, Dan?
No big birthday plans. I mean, we had softball last night and
Yeah.
softball tonight, softball tomorrow night, softball Friday night. So we'll see what Saturday brings. But
Nice.
yeah, I don't 53, man. I tell you. Um
Good for you.
53. My son little smart aleck, I got home from a softball game last night and he had a little cake with 55 on it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's
How you
preparing
doing,
you.
Joshua? Yeah. How's Joshua doing today?
Hanging in there, man.
Good, 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 good. How's your weather though?
Today it's actually sunny for a change, and I think it's going to be almost 60. So I still
Okay.
haven't taken the ice scraper and snow brush out of my vehicle, so I don't know yet if there'll be one more storm through. So
Yeah.
I think if you take it out early, that means you're going to get a storm. So I'll wait till the end of the month, and then we'll
There
probably
you
Smart.
be.
go.
Very smart.
Yeah. Got a new face here, Austin. How you doing today? Yeah, no problem.
I'm doing
There he
all
is.
right. I'm trying to figure out where the heck the unmute button is, but
Oh, there you go. There you go. Where are you from, Austin?
I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, how
Nice.
about yourself?
I'm up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, so about five and a half hours away from each other.
Yeah, I used to work for Travelers Insurance and we had an office up in Grand Rapids and my buddy got married up there. Absolutely a lot of great breweries. I always enjoy
Yeah,
getting up there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It is. Grand Rapids is a great place. It's grown considerably. We moved from being Bland Rapids to Grand Rapids. So used to be. Yeah, I mean, I remember being a kid, and you would drive downtown on a weekend, and there was nobody on a Saturday or Sunday downtown. I mean, it was just a ghost town. And now it's everything is downtown. So all right, we're gonna kick things off here. Let me just get us here live on YouTube. All right, and should be going live here in just 1 second. And let me just make a change here. All right, let's go ahead and kick things off. Very excited to kick things off for this week's WTF Wednesdays. Of course, WTF stands for What the Function, and each week we bring on a different business function expert. And very excited to have CJ Arlotta here. CJ, how are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back, Dan. Appreciate it.
It's good to have you here, and the world of public relations is a never-ending job, right?
That's correct. Always something new and exciting for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And so today's topic, we're gonna talk a little bit about podcasting, and I think we can talk about a variety of topics, but podcasting is an area that I think needs more attention, I think, on the side of MSPs. Getting out there, getting communication out there to clients and prospective clients is critical. We all have a lot of knowledge, and I think we take it for granted. I think a lot of times, like if you sit at a blank sheet of paper and you think, okay, what could I speak about? You think about, gosh, I don't know what I could speak about. I don't even know, what is my specialty. But in reality, we all have so much knowledge, and again, just taking it for granted puts us, behind the eight ball. Would you agree with that, CJ?
Oh, for sure. That's one of the biggest problems, I come across speaking with clients is that they don't know what to talk about. And in reality, you have plenty of things to talk about. It's just that you're kind of in the moment, like you said before, you're staring at a blank page. And the best thing to do in that situation is really to just start what I call kind of an ideas garden. Go through, just think about different topics throughout the day that you speak with clients and keep a running list. It should be a living document where throughout your day, you think about a topic you're hearing over and over and over again. Add it to the list. The next day, do the same thing. And then at the end of the week or in a couple of weeks, you'll see you have a bunch of ideas that you can talk about, topics that you can talk about the next time you're on a podcast, and you'll be surprised. And you could go through that list. You could weed out the ones that are terrible. Not everything's going to be a great idea, but it allows you to focus a little bit more on what you're able to speak about and how you can add value to your audience.
So before we dive in a little bit deeper, has any of those that are currently listening right now that are live in our Zoom group um, had a podcast, considering setting up a podcast, some type of MSP podcast, or just some, maybe some thoughts of doing one? Anyone?
I do one every Friday at 10 a.m. Central.
Hmm.
I do it's called MSP Community Live, where we go through stories that have been submitted to like Reddit or other MSP communities. Then we bring on different people and um, just kind of talk about the story and provide
Yeah.
expertise and things like that.
That's great.
Yeah, and grabbing those current topics. I mean, there's so much, I guess those current events, right? I mean, because obviously, if you're snagging that stuff from, like ideas from Reddit, those are
Hmm.
current topics that people are, there's a lot of chatter, and I think that's a great way to find content.
Reddit's great. Paying attention to what's going on in the news. Obviously, you could take a look at many of the trade publications, podcasts that you're listening to see what people are talking about and what they're interested in for sure.
Absolutely. Is anybody considering doing a podcast? Eric, you look like you want to do a podcast, but it might be on cars versus
I could do that too, but
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, there's only so many people that are weird for old Datsuns, so yeah,
Yeah.
no, I mean, it is actually in our core plans, but I like the idea garden idea. Once you get me talking,
Yeah,
you can
Right.
just go.
right.
It's
Right.
the getting to talking, and I've been on MSP 1337 several times, so I'm not,
Yeah.
it's not like I'm afraid of it or anything.
No,
It's
but
just creating the time to do it. And
Eric, that's what I always tell people too, is that so many executives get, like you said, afraid or they get anxious when they're going on stage, being interviewed, being a guest on a podcast. But they're having you on because you're an expert. You know what you're talking about, right? Hopefully, anyway, right?
no, I just
Yeah,
act like I know what I'm talking about.
right, exactly.
I actually have no clue.
Right, but just to ensure that you know exactly what the messaging you want to speak about, help with your confidence level. When you just go through the day and you're able to pull that out, you'd be amazed at how much you know and what you do during the day. It's really just sitting down and sometimes just planning it all out. It makes it so much easier and it helps all that information come top of mind for when you're being interviewed for a podcast.
Yeah.
And I know there's another person out there. His name starts with a B. His last name ends with a D. that has a podcast. Let's
Yeah.
see if.
So I didn't know if we wanted to reserve this for our MSP friends. Obviously,
No, 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 no. Yeah.
I've been running MSP Business School. We actually have our 5-year anniversary coming up on May 5th, and it's been a
Nice.
great resource both for sharing education. Obviously, we come at it more, we're a vendor, but that podcast has very little to do with what we're doing at VCIO Toolbox. Really more about bringing business side of the MSP life to the community. So M&A conversations, sales and marketing conversations, of course, account management conversations as well. And, and it's been great. It's brought us a lot of guests. It's been one of our tools to get to know other people like Dan in the community. I think that's how we met up, was doing podcasts first.
Yeah.
And we use it as a great resource that way. And we definitely see, if you're chasing end users, invite people from your community.
Yeah.
Invite the IT folks that you're working with so they can share their stories, because it's a great way to open up doors. And it's been a consistent source of leads. Eventually people figure out who I am, and then they come to our company, check it out, and it works.
That's
I mean,
great.
Brian, would you ever have a point when you thought, I don't know, is there anybody going to really listen to me? I mean,
Yeah. So
I think at the beginning it's like kind of like that, right?
huge imposter syndrome in the beginning, right? We all get a little
Yeah.
nervous about getting out there and doing this stuff. But one of the amazing moments for me was it was a couple years ago at IT Nation. Some guy comes out of the bathroom and goes, "I thought that was you. I recognized your voice." And that kind of blew my mind. I'm like, that's scary, a little bit scary on one side, but it was
Yeah.
it was pretty cool to hear that somebody was listening and could actually recognize you from voice as opposed to sight. So, it's really cool. And those that are on this call right now, if you guys want to, we're always looking for MSPs to guest. I got enough vendors jumping on board with me. If
Yeah.
you want to come on MSP Business School, just shoot me a note at bdoyle@VCIO Toolbox. We love having MSPs come in, tell their story, talk about what they've what they've had challenges with in their life, and really kind of move forward from there.
I would encourage anybody on this call, especially what Brian said about they have plenty of vendors. We primarily work with vendors in the MSP space, but those trade publications, the podcasts in the industry, they're always looking to talk with MSPs. So I would encourage you to reach out if you have any interest in being in a story or being on a podcast. Reach out to these content creators, because they're starving for that content from MSPs. They get pitched all the time. Having been a journalist in the industry many years ago, I could tell you we get pitched all the time from vendors, receive plenty of press releases, plenty of story pitches. So if you're an MSP, reach out. They're looking to speak to you.
All right.
And I had a conversation
Brian.
yesterday with an MSP that's been in the channel for a long time, for at least 2 decades, and we were talking about kind of our next step. As far as next step, as far as where we are and what we're doing. I mean, as we're getting older, as we just mentioned, I just turned 53 yesterday. Not that that's old in my
so
eyes.
old, Dan. So old.
Well, the thing is, I mean, there's a new generation coming in, and when we take a look at our people that are part of Everything MSP, we've got those aspiring, the growing, and the mature MSPs. We've got a wide range, and each will feed off of each other. You got those mature MSPs that maybe they've become complacent, and they look to those aspiring and the growing MSPs for fresh ideas. And but again, on the flip side, those that are mature, they've built policies, procedures, they know what works, what doesn't work, and all of that knowledge, regardless of whether you're new or you've been around for a while, um, is powerful. And we just need to get the word out.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So let's jump more into some of your thoughts, CJ, as far as if an MSP wants to start a podcast, what are some things that they should think about, especially when it comes to I think the overall strategy, but also when it comes down to guests and getting the right guests that will make a difference.
Yeah, so the presentation today, we're primarily talking about if you're a guest on a podcast. If you were asked to become a guest on either a industry podcast or if you were asked to become a guest on a local podcast, for example, a business podcast. I think if you're looking to be a guest on a lot of these podcasts, I think there are several things that you should be doing. And I don't know, Dan, if you want to jump into the slideshow that I prepared, we can go through the presentation
Yeah,
and kind of go through that. And obviously,
that'd be great.
I would love to hear Dan's feedback and Brian's feedback since you guys are podcasters. You interview plenty of guests, and you probably have a lot of do's and don'ts that you can also add to this presentation. So I'm relying on you guys too at the end of this. So
Yeah,
let's dive in here. Are you sharing?
Yep. Yeah, you should be good.
Okay. Can you guys see my screen? Nope,
Not yet.
not yet. Okay, let's see here.
There we go.
Okay, let's see. Can you guys see it?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
I think you just want to hit that present button.
Let's see. Hang on a second. Mm. Give me one
It
second.
says, yeah.
Canva. I hate Canva.
I know it's very strange. So hang on a second. Let's see it. Now you see it?
Just see the click to exit full screen.
There you go.
Here we go. We're good?
Yep. We're
Okay,
good.
fantastic. So quick background to me, if you guys don't know me, thanks for having me on. Been on before. I started off doing communications and politics and government, found my way being a journalist, started in the MSP space. I used to write for MSP Mentor, Talking Cloud, the VAR guys, some of those publications I'm sure some of you are familiar with. Left the channel, moved my way into healthcare, eventually moving my way into the hospitality space. And in 2019, started my own PR agency and been running it ever since. We work in two different industries. We work in the MSP space as well in the hospitality space for obvious reasons. We have a lot of relationships there, connections. And so we work with a lot of vendors and a lot of hospitality companies to help them get out in the media through media relations, thought leadership, work with them with content creators and getting them on podcasts and things like that. So I've been on some podcasts. So I see a lot of good do's and don'ts when it comes to being a guest on a podcast. And we always try to prepare our clients as best as possible to be a phenomenal guest on the podcast that they've been invited on. So these are just several tips that you should consider if you're going to be a guest on a podcast. So number one, do your homework, right? There's so many times when I'm speaking with a client, we secure an opportunity for a podcast and maybe they're not familiar with it. They don't know who the hosts are. They don't know what they primarily talk about or even the audience. So do your homework and listen to a full episode before agreeing to appear. I would encourage you to listen to several episodes before you appear on the podcast just to get a feel of the tone and the style and what they're looking for. I also would recommend, and not everybody does this, and I'm not one for meetings for sure, but if possible, try to schedule a prep call with the host to build a rapport if you can. If you've never been on a podcast before or you're still new to it, it really helps you dive right in to help you overcome that. For example, we spoke before about that imposter syndrome, right? It gives you a little helps you at ease and provides you a little bit more confidence when you know who you're speaking with ahead of recording the interview. So if the host doesn't, ask for it, see if you can just at least hop on a 15-minute call just to get a feel. And again, research the podcast format, the length, and the audience. 2, check your equipment, right? So often we've listened to podcasts or video podcasts where you hear the audio quality is terrible or the video quality is terrible. I would encourage you to go out, purchase an external microphone if you can. I have a little lavalier mic here. This wasn't expensive. It's usually a little bit better than the built-in microphone when you're recording. If you have a podcast like Dan, you probably are going out and buying better equipment for a microphone, spending several $100s on yours. I also have that here too. I have the Shure SMB7, I believe. But if you're just an occasional guest on podcasts, I would shy away from that. But try to invest in a decent microphone so you have great audio quality on your end. I would also, just skipping here to the camera, I'm actually using a built-in camera right now. I think it does the job depending on the podcast you're on. The most important thing when it comes to the camera is make sure you pay attention to the lighting. That's most important. So go out, buy a Ring camera. They're not that expensive. They can make all the difference. I don't know if you could tell here. See, I know it dropped a little bit. I have some lighting behind me, but you could definitely tell the difference between having the lighting on and the lighting off. Always have the lighting behind you. It makes the picture a lot clearer. Also, pay attention to the background, what you have going on in the background. I know it's tough depending on where you are. I'm in my home office, so I try to do my best to have a background that's not too crazy, a lot of things going on, but it's always best to kind of get some sort of a natural background if you're in your office. If possible, put books back there, just so you know you have a better setting than something that looks a little blurry, right? Test all equipment before your interview. So before I came on this episode today, I went on Zoom to test my mic, test my camera, just to make sure everything was working. Now, I'm sure some of you know, then you'll go on Zoom or Teams or whatever, and you'll find out that there's an issue, there's an update that you have to deal with, but do your best to check your equipment ahead of time to make sure it's working. So create a simple messaging framework. Before you go on a podcast, oftentimes the host will have a topic that they're looking to explore with you. Try to figure out what you want the audience to take away from your messaging. So identify one main message you want listeners to remember. Take that as the overarching theme, the overarching message, and then develop some supporting points for that particular topic. If you want to talk about how, small businesses can leverage AI in 2025, that's great. That could be your overarching main theme. Go into different supporting points for that overarching theme. Prepare evidence, prepare examples, data points. If you have any studies you can share, that becomes very helpful during your messaging, during the interview. Pro tip, create some sample questions. Oftentimes, a podcast host will provide you with some questions ahead of time if it's on a particular topic. There are times when they won't. Sometimes they want a little bit more of a conversational approach. Bless you. And if that's the case, what you should do is try to prepare questions that you think the audience would get value from, or that you think the journalist would ask you. That way you can help structure your messaging around those questions, and you'll become a little bit more comfortable when the podcast host begins asking you these questions, because you'll probably hit on some of the questions that the host will ask you. If you really have no idea, for example, what they could ask you about a particular topic, if they're a journalist and you're worried that you're going to miss something, feel free to use ChatGPT. It's pretty good with coming up with potential journalist questions if you're working on a particular topic, and work from that. Prepare some memorable stories, right? I mean, you work with clients throughout the day. There are probably some situations that you can share with the host. Have 2 to 3 anecdotes ready. People love to hear stories, so it's not just you speaking on a particular topic. People can relate to that, and they like to see how potentially, depending on the audience and the topic again, but how you've helped your clients overcome particular challenges. Remember, you're really the guide in all this. You're helping them overcome a certain obstacle. And so people like to hear those feel-good stories. So have some of those stories on hand if possible. So I actually, I love this tip, and this is definitely, you should take all the tips away for sure, but definitely pay attention to this one. It's something, we always think about, but I love the way Emma Stratton, her name is, in Make It Punchy. She's a B2B marketer. And she talks about, when it comes to messaging, she talks about the altitude and where you should be with your messaging. So there are certain audiences, this is why it's important to figure out who you're speaking to, where you want to be speaking very high level. Then there are some other audiences where maybe you're on an MSP podcast and you can get very technical because people are going to understand what you're talking about. You can get a little granular and become talk a little bit more in a technical aspect. So finding out who the audience is and then adjusting your altitude for that audience is really important. Also, as far as altitude, you want to think about you want to think about the audience, but you also want to think about the length of the podcast that you're on. So if you're on a podcast and it's a 30-minute podcast, you really can't get too granular, right? You're going to have 5 minutes or so of introductions and closing, and you're really going to have less than 20 minutes to really share your thoughts on the topic. But if you're on a podcast and it's 2 to 3 hours, you can get granular and get a little bit more technical. You have time to walk through your thoughts and your message. So always think about, when it comes to altitude, you always want to think about your audience, and you always want to think about the length of the podcast you're going to be on. And finally, practice active listening during the interview, right? When we're listening, we're always thinking about the next thing we want to talk about. But adjust yourself when you're having a conversation with the host. Maybe you want to take it one way and the host is taking another. That's fine. Always listen to what the host is saying. Look for opportunities to add depth or circle back to your key messages. You want it to be more of a conversation and less than an interview. That's where most people, they really enjoy the conversation. That's where they take a lot out of it. That's where you're going to be more comfortable as a guest. When you're doing a Q&A and it sounds like you're being pressed by a journalist, you're definitely going to have your guard up compared to when you're sitting down and having a conversation with somebody. So stay flexible enough to follow valuable but unexpected directions during the conversation when that arise. So those were just 6 overall tips. You may not be able to do all of them during a particular interview, right? Try to keep them in mind. I always try to keep them in mind. I don't always follow them because I'm human and there are certain things that I forget to do, just like anybody else. But if you stick to those 6 tips, you'll do really well as a guest on any podcast you are on. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Here's my email address, and I'd be happy to answer them for you.
There's a lot of great information. I want to emphasize one thing is just the equipment. Having solid equipment is so critical. I have had some people on, not necessarily podcasts, but just on some of our weekly calls, or maybe even it could even be on some of our elevator pitches where um, they're not regularly on camera
Yeah.
or on audio, and the quality of their lighting, the quality of their camera really has a big impact on the view, because let's face it, first impressions make a big difference. And so I think too, with us being MSPs, I mean, we are in the tech world. We understand this equipment, and it's important to make that investment into the right equipment to ensure that your image is coming across that way you want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. And look, you're representing yourself, but you're also, representing the podcast that you're on as a guest. And you
Right.
want the podcast to look good as well and the host to look good. So if you have terrible audio quality, people are going to turn off. They're not going to want to listen to. We've all been there listening to podcasts with terrible audio quality. You try to get around it for a minute or two, and then you end up turning it off. So definitely take the time to invest in the right equipment for sure.
Another thing too is when you talked about testing your equipment, so critical not to wait just minutes before you're going to jump on to check it.
Yeah.
Or maybe you've been busy doing something else. You haven't been on your laptop. You get to your desk, you fire it up. I will be the first to admit that this has happened to me, many moons ago. But you rush back to your desk, you plug everything in, and all of a sudden there's some kind of an update going on your computer, whether it be Zoom or
Always.
just something that throws a wrench into the situation. So,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And I
Dan,
do
and
want
it's always there are things that are going to come up like that, right? And I try to
to.
test my equipment like I did before, but of course, same thing. I had an update that I had to deal with. And that's why it's important to do it before the podcast that you're going to appear on. If you can do it the day before too, if there's an issue, maybe you can go out and pick something up if you need to resolve that so you'll be better prepared for the interview tomorrow. You're always going to have some sort of issues during whether you're on stage or being interviewed or interviewing something else. The goal is
Yeah.
always to limit those issues, right? As much as you possibly can. Things are going to happen. The landscapers are going to come by, for example.
Right.
So there are so many things that you could try to limit. Maybe try to get those guys come a different day, but sometimes it's impossible to do. And so just try to limit as many of those issues as possible so the podcast episode goes as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, and I think too, while the host may provide you this information, but just finding out what the platform is going to be ahead of time.
Yeah.
So of course here we're using Zoom, but when we record our podcast, we're using StreamYard.
Mm.
And so if somebody's not familiar with the StreamYard platform, that can be a challenge. Or if there's certain type of settings that need to be put in place, like for example, echo cancellation. Some might have the ability to adjust the volume, your microphone volume. Like there's different settings that can make or break, that beginning process. Fortunately, some tools like StreamYard, so we actually have the ability to control the settings of the guest's microphone. So, those are cool settings that you can go into and you can, turn something on, turn something off, to have an impact on that. But yeah, knowing the platform can be very good. So as I do have other questions for you, but I want to make sure that any of our guests that are here today, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to jump in. And Brian, you're welcome to jump in as you wish as well. To share any kind of advice that you have
Yeah,
too.
my tip is really, as a guest, take a breath. One of the things that I see also is when you've got somebody that's, that hasn't had the opportunity to do very many podcasts, they'll come in and they're really ready to speak and they do a good job, but engage the host. CJ, you talked a little bit about it. You want to make it conversational. So,
Mhm.
as you're talking, pause or even ask the host, what do you think of that? Believe it or
Mhm.
not, it goes a long way because it really helps keep the listener engaged as well. There needs to be some natural pauses in the conversation.
Yeah, taking a beat is so important, and that's something I always have to think about. Being from New York, we talk really fast, so I always have to remind myself, hey, talk a little slower and then talk even slower, right? So it's okay to breathe, take a beat when you need to. And that also helps. Here's another pro tip that I was just thinking about now is when it comes to fillers, when you think about the uhs and the uhs, right? When you take a beat, it's a lot harder to have those fillers come through. So that's why taking a beat and thinking about what you're saying can go, a far way, for sure.
Absolutely. And and one thing, and Brian, you could probably test this too, but knowing what those upcoming questions are going to be is so important because if you're speaking about something and you start going a little bit deeper into it, and then all of a sudden you're answering, you're the host's next few questions, So if there's 5 questions and in one question you answered 3 of them, that host might be thrown off a little bit, thinking, "Oh no, I got to quickly come up with some questions here."
Yeah. I've been there before too, Dan, where those questions, that's why some hosts don't like to give questions ahead of time, because I've seen that just doing some podcasts on my side. I've recorded them on my side as well as the host. And you see that you send them 10 questions, you ask them the first question, and they go through 1 through 5 already, right?
Right.
And so now you're on the fly trying to adjust and rework things a little bit. So it's always important to think about that as a guest. But I always look at those questions, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong, but I always look at those questions as kind of a framework, a guidance where we'd like to be, but we don't have to stick, as I said before, stick primarily to those questions because we want it to be more of a conversation instead of just a Q&A. I think many of us have been on that other side where a host just doesn't seem that interested perhaps, and they're going through each question and it just feels like you're being interrogated instead of having a conversation.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to share. Dan and I have both been in each other's podcasts in the past, and one of the things that we always find is, I know we've done this, Dan, is just what's the topic we want to cover, and if you just kind of at least have kind of a framework of the conversation of the topic you want to cover, those questions just come naturally. You open it up for the
Yeah.
conversation, and as hosts, we want to make sure the guests are doing the majority of the talking, but you still want it to be a 70-30 cut at a bare minimum, in
Right.
order to make the listener feel comfortable as well.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
So when we talk about the length of the podcast, that was another thing. Obviously if we're looking at a half hour, I think being able to spread the content out properly, it's a little bit of a science to that. And so let's talk a little bit about that and some of your ways of, how much time are you putting into each question? Ensuring that one, you don't wrap up too early, but also, you don't get to a point where, you've not been able to ask all the questions that you really want to do. Because I think when we're passionate about what we're talking, the topic that we're talking about, it's easy to continue to go on and on.
Yeah.
Very easy.
Yeah, for sure. I always recommend to executives, whether they're going to be on a panel or on a podcast, I always recommend that they chart out more questions than necessary, just so they're prepared, right? You may only hit maybe 10 of those questions, 5 out of the 10 of the questions that you have, but at least chart out those questions, have them highlighted just so you're familiar with them. When you're familiar with those questions, it's a lot easier for you to answer them during the interview, right? Because they're top of mind. You're going to get surprise questions, especially if it's more of a conversation like we've been having. But having some of those prepared ahead of time, depending on, if you take a look, like you mentioned before, the length of the interview. If you're in a 30-minute, if you have a 30-minute podcast, you may only get through 5 or 6 questions. An hour, you might get through 10 questions. So when you consider the size of the podcast, the length of the podcast, and the number of questions, you don't have to go too overboard, but find a little bit more than you think you should, just so you're prepared for potential questions the host may be, so you've thought them out, right? So I think that's the other thing when I have executives who ask for questions ahead of time. Depending on the podcast, when you're working with a journalist, sometimes they don't like doing that, right? But in reality, it's not for them to necessarily prepare for these questions that are going to be, out there to handle those questions that they feel like they're going to be tripped up. It's just so the podcast guest can prepare for some of those questions and give some thoughtful responses, right? So I think it's important to kind of have it both ways from the guest and the host as well. Let's provide some of that kind of guidance. Here are some of the questions I may ask, just so you can have more of a thoughtful and meaningful conversation.
Absolutely. Any questions out there right now as we're moving forward here? Who's got a burning question? come on, really? Not one. Come on.
Everybody's an excellent guest on podcasts. I love that. That's good to hear.
Yes. All right, so we
Dan.
should
Well, the only one that's talking here is me, and you know, yeah, I've done enough that I feel like I'm a pretty good guest and can get just random stuff thrown at me. That's the
Eric, what are some of the hardest things you come across as being a guest on a podcast? You seem very comfortable with them and handling questions, but what are some of the challenges you've had that you've had to actually overcome over the years, right? Maybe you weren't always comfortable being a guest. So what were some of the challenges you've had to overcome over the years?
um
The filler words, right?
right.
Right.
So
We all
having
do it.
right, having the filler word problem, and I think I got better at that because I speak publicly, not for industry
Mhm.
now, pretty frequently, and I just
Yeah.
learned how to stop doing that. You know, if I almost did it right there and caught myself.
Yeah, we all do it. It happens. One of the best tricks, I think I mentioned this before, is to take a breath after a sentence. That's where a lot of the filler words come through. So if you breathe in at the end of the sentence, it's a lot harder to say or Another thing you should do, um, I did it right there, is to record yourself and see how many times you use filler words so you're a little bit more aware of it, because we all do it, and it allows you to pinpoint where your issues are and adjust accordingly.
Right.
Norm has got a question out there in regards to best advice for how to get the word out and get more participants. So, uh, I think there's a incredible opportunity for us to become a guest on a podcast. Maybe it's a local, business focused podcast that, you are a guest and you're going to talk about cybersecurity. And getting this out to your clients and also prospective clients. Of course, your guest is going to get this out, is going to broadcast it, going to publicize it. But that doesn't mean that you can't put some marketing behind it as well, right?
Agreed. If you're a guest on a podcast, share it everywhere. I did the same thing being on the podcast today. Dan tagged me. I shared it on my LinkedIn profile. I think that by doing that, by sending out, if you have a newsletter, put it in your newsletter to get your customers, your prospects listening. If it's a live podcast, right, you can have them join while you're recording it. If it's a podcast where it's being recorded and published later, make sure you share that at a later date whenever it is published, your newsletter, your social media, whatever you have to get that message out there would be beneficial to not only you, but also your prospects, right? So you may have customers on your newsletter, but you also have prospects or people who are following you because you're an expert in a particular area. And when they see that you're on podcasts, when you're writing thought leadership articles, when you're being interviewed by journalists, they're more likely to see you as a thought leader, and it increases your visibility and authority in the space. And what it also does is it opens up the opportunity for other podcasts to see you. It increases your visibility in the industry, for example, other podcasts to see you, other journalists to see you, that they see that you are great you can be interviewed, you know how to be interviewed, you know how to write if it comes to thought leadership articles. So those are some of the best ways to get your message out there if you've been interviewed on a podcast, for sure.
Well, I want to throw one thing out, kind of do a correlation to, something a little bit more older school that I don't want to say it's not relevant anymore, but, running a PR agency as you do, when we think about maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, we would go to a PR agency and say, hey, we want to get some exposure. We want to be able to get some interviews. We want our local ABC, NBC station, to reach out to us when they have, an interview that they're going to do, maybe about some kind of a breach, and they want an IT expert. Um, really, it's no different than today being in 2025. For us to be able to get onto a podcast, we could still seek out someone like yourself. If correct me if I'm wrong here, but you can help us get those podcast interviews, much like maybe what we were aspiring in the past would be more TV interviews. Would that be the same analogy and a correlation to today, 2025?
Yeah, look, you can hire somebody like me to help you get on podcasts, but let me give you some thoughts on how you can do it without hiring somebody like me. People, like we've mentioned before, these journalists, these publications, these content creators, they're starving for content. And especially if you pay attention to what's going on in the news, if it's ransomware or AI or any of the other relevant topics, journalists, podcasters are looking for guests. So if you see local podcasts in your community, whether it's other businesses doing them, other businesses in your chamber of commerce, it could be local media outlets. Reach out to them, send them a short pitch if you've never had interaction before, send them an email, tell them who you are, tell them what you can talk about, give them several different topics that you're an expert on. If you've done previous interviews before, link there so they know again that you're going to be a good interview. They also know somebody else vetted you. So if you were on several other podcasts, if you're sending that email to a journalist, they'll see that other people have vetted you before, and it really increases your authority in the industry as an expert. So don't be afraid to reach out to those podcasts. Send that email. You may not get a response right away, but you have to have that initial contact with a journalist. They may not respond to you right away, but somewhere down the line, they may have saved your email and they may reach out to you later. Maybe something happened in the news. There was a huge breach and they need an expert. They go, oh, this guy Dan, he reached out to me. Let me check him out. Let me check his email. Let me see if he's available. So you need to have that initial contact. Send that email with that journalist. Ensure that you show them that you're familiar with their outlet, whether it's a podcast or a local TV station. Show them that you're the expert. Show them that you know what they cover, what they speak about specifically, and you will potentially be a guest later on at some point with that outlet.
Absolutely. And it's something that you just don't do. It just doesn't happen overnight, right? I
No.
mean, you're needing to develop relationships just as you would in any other case because they don't know who you are. They don't have that, the rapport and the credibility aspect, and it just takes time.
Yeah. And Dan, look, there's this thing called newsjacking that we talk about in PR, and is paying attention to things, what's going on in the media that you can reach out to a journalist about. So if you see that there was a huge breach at a larger company, there are going to be some local stations, local journalists that are probably going to want to cover that, and they're going to need a source for that story. So if you see something like that, reach out to them. Hey, I'm sure you saw what happened today. I'm happy to provide some insight if you need me to.
And trying to find, those local podcasts. We mentioned AI just briefly.
Yep.
Literally use ChatGPT, use Gemini, use any kind of AI tool. I just typed in what are some local podcasts that are business focused in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And it gave me a list of, I don't know, 5 to 10 different ones and it gave me a description, as far as the type of content that they're getting across. And, you can dig a little bit deeper, have it include contacts, but just leverage tools that are out there. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
For sure. I mean, there are so many different ways that you can find podcasts, right? I mean, being a PR agency, we have a media database that we use. That's a little bit more expensive, but you can use tools like ChatGPT, use the search engines. If you're looking for for example, local reporters for stories. I use Google News all the time. I look to see, I type in a topic and I look for the local area and find out who that reporter is for that specific topic, right? Because that's really hard. It's easy for you to find as a specific outlet, for example, but finding that specific reporter that covers that particular beat is a little bit more difficult. But especially when it comes to podcasts, Dan, go through that podcast list, because sometimes they're outdated, right? The same thing in the MSP space. I always try to look up different MSP podcasts, and you go through a list of 20 of them, and maybe there are 5 that aren't really doing much anymore. So you really need to stay on top of that. You need to keep that list updated. Try to see what else is out there. I love using LinkedIn for finding new MSP podcasts, what people are doing in the industry. That's a great way to just stay on top of the new podcasts that are coming out. And one thing I would add to this conversation, Dan, when you look at a lot of these podcasts, I have executives always asking me, hey, what type of reach do they get? How many viewers?
Yeah.
And that's important. But sometimes what's even more important is that you're working with these podcasters, you're becoming familiar with them. They're creating content for you to use that you can go back to your customers with, right? You can, again, what we said before, you can share on the social media, you can share in your newsletter. They're helping you create that content and you can use it. It's also great when you get in on the ground level with a new podcast. Maybe the podcast doesn't go anywhere after a year, but maybe it grows to that huge audience that you're looking for. And now you already have it in with the podcast host. And maybe you're unsure of whether you should try a new podcast. There are things that you can look for, right? I mean, figure out the podcast host. Is the person known in the industry, for example, that has some credibility? Great. Do you know this person and you know their background? We talked about equipment before. How much of investment have they made in starting this new podcast? Do they have new equipment? Have they invested money? Do they have a small team around them, right? These are some of the things you can look for to determine if this is something that somebody's just starting and they're going to quit in a month, or this is part of more of a long-term plan.
Absolutely. And of course, if anybody does have any questions, looks like Josh has a question. Josh, go ahead and jump in.
Not quite a question, but going back to the earlier conversation about being a guest, I have a pretty good don't. So if you're given like the questions ahead of time or you're coming on, you might come up with like an outline or a script. But when you're on the podcast, don't read it word for word. Like have it up as a reference point, but it's pretty obvious like when you're reading from a script and not like a conversation or anything. Your cadence and how you talk and how you deliver is completely different than it like coming across natural. So don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen that often? I've seen it a couple of times where that's so obvious. I mean, it happens. And sometimes you have to remind people not to do that. They get so worried that they need to remember everything word for word. But again, it's really just guidance. It's some guardrails. You remember, it's just talking points you want, right? You're not trying to remember word for word. So have you seen that pretty often, or is that on a rare occasion?
It happens. I don't think it's not rare, but it's also not every time. So like it's one of those things that comes up kind of, handful of times.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Dan?
Well, I do think that just be human, right? I mean, if you make a mistake, you make a mistake. That just shows that you are human, and you're not trying to put something that's so polished across that it looks fake.
Right, right. And I think people appreciate that, right?
So, CJ, I mean, you are a natural speaker. Obviously, you're in the PR field, so whether you're on camera or you're on an event like this, I'm sure you weren't born and immediately a PR expert in a camera, getting in front of the camera expert. It took some time, right? You developed this over a period of time, and so yeah.
I I wouldn't say natural. I've definitely developed it over time, and it's just repetition. It's reading different books on communication. It's trying new things. I've mentioned this before. Oftentimes, we're just very uncomfortable with being on stage or being on a podcast. So the way to get over that is doing more of them. I do a lot of panels. I moderate a lot of panels anyway, and every time I go on stage, people always say, "Man, this must be great for you. This must generate new business. It gets you out there." Sure, it gets me out there, but I can't tell you, if I generated any business from it, right? I do it so I keep pushing myself. And so I become more comfortable on stage. So I become
Yeah.
more comfortable on podcasts and doing this. It takes time and it takes hard work. Try different things. Like last year, I did an improv course, right? I did
Mhm.
improv. It was fantastic. It was about, I took I think 5 sessions we had, so it wasn't a lot. But there are 15 of us in the room. I think 2 of us were kind of in the same spot where we had a business. We were just trying to learn how to enhance our speaking abilities. There were some actors and there were some people who admitted they are uncomfortable speaking in front of, not just in speaking in front of people, but just having
Yeah.
conversations with people they're not familiar with. And I think that takes a lot of guts to be in that situation and speak with 15 random people that you don't
Right.
know, right? So always try to put yourself out of your comfort zone.
That the idea of an improv class, I had someone bring that up. Steve West brought that up, several months ago, and I love that idea. I have not signed up yet for local, but I have looked and sought out what is available in our area, and I think that's a great thing. And and also too, I think a lot of us have become much more comfortable being on camera since the pandemic
Yes.
because when we take a look at our world has shifted to from that in person to online. I think a lot of us are doing more of these team Zoom type meetings with their clients. They're doing it with their peers. We obviously do these calls every Wednesday. We also have our Friday calls, our MSP discussion group calls that we've been hosting for over 5 years now. And
Congrats.
and many of the faces that you see here have been on the call for the last 5 years, and
Yeah.
that's an incredible amount of experience of being comfortable and just not being afraid. I mean, I remember before the pandemic, how often did we jump onto a Zoom call with our clients? Probably not very often,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
And part of it, I think, was we weren't used to it. It wasn't the standard at that point. Meeting face to face was more the standard, but also it just seemed weird. And I think it might
I
might have
agree.
been weird for us, but I
Yeah.
think it would be even more weird for our audience, our clients.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's so many times where I just would rather just hop on the phone and call somebody, right? Everything
Yeah,
is Zooms or Teams meetings now. But I would encourage people, and I know it sounds silly, but even during meetings, I would look at those as opportunities to practice your on-camera appearance and how you
yeah,
talk to the camera and what's in your background and your lighting. Don't just say, this is a meeting with a client. I know them for a while. I don't need the lighting. I don't need, just use it as practice so you feel more comfortable. Sometimes speaking to the camera is like this, very weird for people and awkward. So just
right.
practice it during meetings. And so on your next podcast, if you're speaking to the camera or you're at an event and they have you sitting down in front of like a video interview with the journalist, that's even more intimidating. And that's for a story for a different time. But you're used to speaking to something that's not a person. You're speaking to a camera lens, right? So just take
Right.
those opportunities to practice when you can.
Yeah, a great point from Jackie. Recommend looking for podcasts about client industry that are not technical. You'd be seen as that technical advisor for their non-technical industry listeners,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think that's critical. Um, a lot of these chamber events or local business, publications that have podcasts, they want to talk about business outcomes, not necessarily technical components.
Right. Think about the verticals you serve, right? That's great advice.
Absolutely. All right. So as we're wrapping up things here at the top of the hour, any final parting words that you'd like to share to our audience?
I think, like I said before, practice, practice, practice. It's going to be very awkward at first doing a lot of podcast interviews, but take them on, be willing to do them. You don't have to do a lot right away, spread them out, right? But be willing to take on those podcasts and go the extra mile and implement some of these tips that I provided you. And don't do them all at once. Work them in, over time, and I think you'll find success over time as a podcast guest for sure.
And I'll just add in, just do it. To quote Nike, just do it.
Yeah.
Get out there. Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
You make a mistake, that's okay. Tomorrow's a new day, and
Yep.
you learn from each opportunity, each challenge.
Yep.
And yeah. So CJ, Mr. CJ Arlotta, I want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Always great chatting with you. A lot of good information.
Right.
And I did throw into chat earlier a link to be able to connect with CJ on LinkedIn.
Right.
So be sure to connect with CJ. And with that being said, I want to thank everybody for being here today. Until next time, we'll talk to everybody soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Dan. Good seeing everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Take care.
Bye now.